Casino Royale was directed by Martin Campbell and stars Daniel Craig, who makes his first appearance as the iconic character James Bond. In his first mission, James Bond must go head-to-head with the banker Lashif in a high-stakes poker game in order to put an end to his funding of terrorism. So right now I'm doing a Daniel Craig James Bond movie review series where I'll be reviewing every single Daniel Craig James Bond film, starting with Casino Royale and ending with No Time to Die. I will say in my reviews I will have some spoilers, so if you've never seen Casino Royale, go ahead and watch it first and then come back and watch my review. So Casino Royale was Daniel Craig's debut as the character James Bond, and a lot of people were skeptical because, well, the obvious thing is that he looks nothing like how the original James Bond looks, which, looking back on that, it is so stupid. Daniel Craig was the perfect casting choice as this character, James Bond. I am so happy he was chosen. He has been so good as this character that I can't envision anyone else in modern day playing this character as well as he has. So to all the haters back in 2006, what were you thinking? This guy was awesome as James Bond, and I am ecstatic that he is still playing the character in 2020. Now, when discussing Casino Royale, the first thing that usually strikes me is this opening sequence that takes place in black and white, and this is a very different opening sequence than we're used to with the James Bond films, which kind of gives us an idea that this will be an entirely different James Bond film than we're used to, which I really appreciate because we've always been given that formulaic James Bond film, and for once, Casino Royale brings a different take on the character and the story itself. And I can't just not mention Chris Cornell's song for Casino Royale, You Know My Name. It's one of the absolute best James Bond songs of all time. I am so sad that Chris Cornell passed away back in 2017 because he made so many great songs, and You Know My Name is one of them. Also, to go back to the black and white opening sequence, I love how this film shows James Bond getting his 00 status because we've never really been given that before in a James Bond film. So for us to see James Bond become 007 is iconic in itself, and I love how they did that. But where this movie seriously picks up are in the two early action sequences that take place. The parkour sequence that's in Madagascar, and then you have the Miami airport sequence. Both of these action sequences are two of the greatest James Bond action sequences ever made. The parkour sequence, it might be slightly better than the airport sequence just because I don't know how the heck they were able to film this scene, let alone get the choreography down. I don't have a single clue how they were able to get it done. The parkour sequence is awesome, and the Miami airport sequence also is very intense. Definitely one of the very best James Bond action sequences of all time. Something else I haven't mentioned is how Casino Royale feels about as close to an R rating as you can possibly get with a PG-13 movie. This film is so gritty, it's very violent, one of the most violent James Bond films made to this day. And also, there's this scene towards the end of the movie, which I'll touch on by the end of this review, that I have no idea how the heck it made this film still PG-13. With that sequence, I am astonished this movie was not rated R. In terms of story, I will say it is a bit hard to follow, but if you just pay attention, you'll be riveted by what's going on between James Bond and Lashif. James Bond is doing anything he possibly can to track down this guy, put an end to his funding of terrorism. It's really great stuff. And that all comes to an epic climax when we get to James Bond versus Lashif in a high-stakes poker game, maybe one of the best James Bond sequences of all time. And this thing is almost an hour long, but the entire time you are glued to the screen. You're wondering, is James Bond gonna win? Is Lashif gonna win? What's going to happen? This was wonderfully directed. Plus, it never gets stale because they throw in a couple of other sequences to keep the movie moving and feeling fresh, such as the scene where James Bond is fighting the guys from Uganda. Then you have the scene where he's about to go through cardiac arrest after Lashif poisons his drink. Oh, and I also have to mention James Bond's love interest in the film, played by Eva Green. That is Vesper, who I think is also one of the best Bond girls in a James Bond film of all time because she has depth. She's not just there to be James Bond's love interest. She has a backstory. There are motivations within that character. It's not just a one-dimensional character. And also, she was great in the film. Eva Green gives one of her best performances. But let's talk about the one scene I was talking about earlier where I did not get into it. This is a scene that takes place towards the end of the film, and that is when Le Chiffre is whacking James Bond's genitalia. Yeah, he hits it pretty hard, and this scene is brutal to watch. I'm not sure how this movie was approved a PG-13 rating after this scene was in the final cut of the film, but yes, it's brutal, and I was so shocked to see what was going on in front of my eyes on this big screen. As it stands, Casino Royale is one of the greatest James Bond films ever made, if not one of the best films of all time. Many people will say this film is perfect. I just have one problem with the movie, and that comes at the very end. 25-30 minutes maybe of the film left, and there's this one sequence that goes down with Vesper where she betrays James Bond because the people with Le Chiffre were going to kill her love interest that was not James Bond, somebody else that they had captured. And this entire sequence goes on for about 25-30 minutes. And you feel like James Bond is going to fall in love with her. And the problem I have with this sequence is that it does feel tacked on. It doesn't necessarily need to be there, in my opinion, because we already had the climax with Le Chiffre, and I'm wondering why there were two climaxes in this film. I don't necessarily think it's the worst thing in the world, but it does feel just a bit tacked on. I would have preferred had they just gone with one climax. It doesn't bog this movie down much at all, though, for myself, because Casino Royale, like I said, is one of the best James Bond films ever made. It's up there for top 3 for myself. I love Casino Royale. It is such a good movie. So Casino Royale for me gets a 97%. Almost there at 100, but that final last 20 minutes does feel just a little bit tacked on. So close though, so close. This movie is amazing. I absolutely love Casino Royale. Like I said, Daniel Craig, greatest James Bond. I am so happy he has played the character for such a long time. So can't wait for No Time to Die. My next review of this James Bond series will be for Quantum of Solace. That should come out in a couple of weeks, so get ready for that. If you're new to my channel, click the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I hope you all have a fantastic day.